I've only got 12 minutes to do this, and it's quite a big subject, so I'll be talking more on processes than a whole lot of figures. There will be figures there. This will be available on the web, and there will be a paper written afterwards. Essentially, we're talking about the security of rhino and protected areas in private land and in South Africa. A lot of it's been covered by Richard before, so I'm not going to labor on some of the stats, but my overview of what I'll be covering today is the trends to date in South Africa and Southern Africa. I won't repeat too much of what Richard said. The poaching rates are assessed for South Africa. I think that's a critical thing. We often just look at the numbers. We don't look at the rates, and that's the figure you should be watching. We'll look at the distribution of poaching pressure and its probable reasons in KZN. We've always got to work out why this is happening and try and fix it. And then we've got to put up a few challenges and suggested solutions will be discussed. We saw the figures from Richard earlier. The left-hand column, you can see the countries. I've got a pointer here. An old pensioner is helping me out here. Thanks, Pete. Countries on the left. White-haired pensioner. Thanks, Pete. He's called Pointer Pete. You can see the numbers poached in this is up to 2011. Remember, countries give to SADC and IUCN the figures at the end of the year. So these are the figures, the rates. You look at the rates on the right, South Africa's current rate is sitting at 2.16 in 2011. Hasn't changed yet till 2012, in 2012, but it can change quite rapidly. A graph you've seen, very familiar with it. Depends on how you squash the graph and how steep it climbs. But I thought we'd show KZN there. We were doing quite well until Black September, and it's gone into October, but it's under control. We're not losing it. We have got intervention strategies to beat it, but we're doing quite well. Also emphasizing the communal and private land. You'll see what's happened here as KZN Wildlife in the state protected area jacked up its security. What did the poachers do? They're smart. They just moved onto private land, and slowly they're gearing themselves up. So that sudden dramatic climb there was kind of predicted. Now, these are the South African poaching rates for 2011-2012. Provinces on your left. The next column is the population sizes, 20,701. You saw I've put Mpumalanga and Kruger National Park as one. You can see what the figures are. You've got the number poached in 2011. That is the percentage of the population poached. And then you've got the numbers poached to date in 2012, sitting as of last week, 463. That is the latest figure. I understand from Ken it was going to go to the minister yesterday. It's probably changed since then. But that's the figure we're working on at the moment. You can see the percentage poached in 2012. And then you've got the mean 2-year poaching rate. And that's the figure we must watch. You know, you've got to get this thing into context and got to get into perspective. The national mean 2-year poaching rate is 2.16. I had to highlight KZN. You know, I don't want to tempt fate, and next weekend we use 10 rhino. But we're actually doing damn well. In the last 2 years, we're sitting at 1.16% of our population being poached to date. Given the annual potential growth rate from the 18-year mean reflected by Richard is 6.9%, we're a long way from losing more rhino than are breeding. A good sign, but not to despair. I then drill down. Why are particular areas in KZN being hit? This is a 5-year period, ladies and gentlemen, from 28 to 2012. Some of the more recent situations have changed. I don't want our executive to stress. There have been some interventions. Protected areas in KZN A to J, they're actual areas in our province. The next column is the mean percentage poached per annum from 28 to 2012. Guys, do the maths. An example is A. Area A in 2008 lost 23%. This is average for those 5 years. In 2009, with growth, with what was left, was 23%. In 2010, and so on. So, you know, it's quite serious stuff. Clearly, poaching is skewed towards certain protected areas, and we'll get on to why we're looking at those later. But, you know, there's 5 areas we're looking at quite critically. Remember, this is a 5-year period. A lot has changed. Area A and B, for example, dramatic change in management and leadership has turned that around. The scary part is some of the guys down the bottom that were sitting at 0 have suddenly gone a bit shaky, but we know what they are, and we're dealing with it. I threw up a column of the management effectiveness score that IUCN does. We've done all our areas. It's the tracking tool, and you'll see that if you look at the graph on the right, the IUCN Management Effectiveness Score is not a particular good predictor of vulnerability. I spoke to the gentleman that does it for our organization yesterday, and clearly we need to have more emphasis with our management effectiveness, this tool we use to cater for the vulnerability and security issue. I mean, to be honest, if you've got management effectiveness rating high, say for Area B, that cracked to 70%, but lost nearly all his Rhino in 5 years, it's crazy. What is management effectiveness? I understand it covers a wide spectrum, but it needs to put a little more emphasis on security. It's not just the Rhino. If you're looking after the rhinos, it's the elephants, it's the rats and mice. So I think we could tweak that up, and we are looking at it when we next do the exercise. What explains these discrepancies in these protected areas? There again, the actual areas on the left. I've listed the key points which I think are important on the top column. Don't worry too much about the scores. 2 is poor, 1 is fair, 0 and 0 is good. This is again over this 5-year period. The issues that we need to concern ourselves in running our protected areas, certainly for KZN, and I don't think it's any different. You've got to look at the field ranger density per square kilometre meeting the norm. IUCN states 1 to 10 square kilometres to 20. In KZN, it's 10. We find if you go above that, you're going to start losing rhino. You've got to be adequately resourced. You've got to have competent leadership, right people in the right jobs. Your staff have got to be motivated, and we'll go on to the reasons that makes a motivated lad. You've got to have standing operating procedures, and intervention plans must be implemented. As our CEO said in a meeting he chaired 3 weeks ago in Durban, when all this was going on, it's no longer business as usual. We are in an intervention phase. We can't just run our areas with the old anti-poaching plans. It has to be different. Intelligence and investigations, you'll hear from our colleague Ken here and Sandparks later, absolutely vital. We then had a mean score at the end of the column, and you can see the vulnerability median is quite high, very poor in some of our areas, but they are turning around. And it's quite obvious with the graph below that the more vulnerable you are, the more rhino you're going to lose. It's obvious, and those points are there. You can add another 10 to the ones at the top, but those are kind of the top 6. You crack that, you're going to be fine. What are the challenges and operational issues? They are talking about the items that I raised in the previous slide. Field ranger staffing and deployment. You've got to optimize field ranger density and strategic deployment. Some of our areas meet the 1 in 10, some don't. Those that don't are losing rhino. You just do the maths, guys. There's no fancy stuff here. I know it differs in areas, big areas like Kruger. I know what their density are. I'm not going to declare it. But different situations, depending on your border situation, depends on the community that's adjacent to you. There are a whole lot of uniquenesses. It's not set in stone, but we find 1 in 10 works for us. You've got to measure field ranger efforts, spatial cover monitoring. We've spent millions of rand on Cyber Tracker. Sandparks also use it. You've got to know where your guys are operating every day. It's like filling in your mileage claim at the end of the month. Every field ranger has to account for where he's been and maybe where he's not been. You've got to interrogate that data. Very important. Adequately resourced. You need budget, equipment, staff, and infrastructure. Infrastructure, I'm talking about decent houses, good places for field rangers to live in so they feel motivated. Competent leadership, finding it more and more. You need a guy that's jacked. He's got his finger on the pulse. He's networking with the security agencies. He's having coordination meetings. They're on it the whole time. You've got to maintain good staff relations. We all know if you don't look after your staff, they're going to go slow and you won't even know it. So create good staff relations. No, you don't. People think the guys are great. They send the guy with the Cyber Tracker to run while they're fishing at the river. And you'll never know that unless you've got good checks and balances, and this is what leadership's about. Maintain good community relations and channels of communication. We know the hardcore poachers come into our communities, winning the hearts and minds. Doesn't often help, but you've got to have open lines of communication, so if they hear somebody suspicious coming through, they're likely to tell you. Your communications is open. You've got freedom of access day and night. Set performance management KPIs. You've got to hold people accountable. That is the most important thing. Whenever rhinos go down, it's always this guy's problem, and I didn't do that, and it's the IO didn't follow up, and I didn't get the information from the eco-advice with the mapping to interrogate the Cyber Tracker. It's all nonsense. The guy that runs that area, it's his problem. He must sort it out. People got to be held accountable through KPIs. KZN Wildlife is in performance management at the moment, right down to the lowest levels. It's a good system. It's tedious. It's onerous, but it's very good for keeping people in line. And people who don't Perform will be counselled. Staff motivation, commitment, training and discipline says it all. Polygraphing, it's a big thing in the country now. Private sector use it a lot. We're certainly going into it. National have not quite given it as a directive, but they're highly recommending it. I'm talking about DEA. Benefits and allowances must have them sorted. There's one thing you don't mess around with a Game Scout, Game Guard, or Field Ranger. Don't mess around with his salary, his allowances, his benefits, and his uniform. If you do, you're on fire. He's going to beat you. So, standard operating procedures, develop an intervention plan and standing operating procedures, absolutely essential. Standing operating procedures range from whether you use a cell phone on patrol to how you man gates. Implement those things. No good tick in the box, now I've done all my SOPs, but are you implementing them? Conduct rapid risk vulnerability assessments. We do them twice a year. Intelligence investigation, strict focus management. We're talking about informers, rewards, debriefing, and tasking. Post-hunt stuff, I don't think we do enough of that. Proactive interception before rhino poach. So often we get all the int after the rhino's been poached. Guys, we've got to get there before the rhino's poached. Need that information, need it to be proactive. Cases getting to court, very low countrywide, but when we do get them to court, the convictions are high. Conclusion, poaching levels are increasing, currently sustainable, but unacceptable. Vulnerable PAs and game ranchers are being identified and targeted by rhino poachers and syndicates. Vulnerabilities can easily be identified and resolved given commitment and resources. Guys, we've got 1 year to fix this. We're not expecting our executive and everybody to make a decision before Christmas, but we've got 1 year. If we don't fix it in 2013, in 2014, it's the slippery slide. We can do it. I honestly believe we've got the commitment, certainly from our CEO, in terms of the resources and everything that's required. We need to develop a culture of accountability. We need to sort out the prosecution process and get successful convictions, and we need central coordination, management of crime, and intelligence data. That's all I've got time for, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen, for Tony? Tony, I was standing next to you not to pressurize you, but to support you. So,
thank you, mate.
And Pete, don't worry. Next time he calls you a pensioner, tell him you are a senior citizen. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take 2 questions. Thank you very much. If you can help me.
I'm David Cook, I'm an independent. I'd just like to know whether you've made an assessment or quantified the cost at the optimum level of those various points which you have elucidated. In other words, a financial cost to reach the optimum level that you believe is necessary.
The model, and it changes quite a lot, the current model to run per square kilometer is $4,500. Interestingly enough, some of those guys at the top have got that kind of money, but the staffing levels, I think, were probably some of the major reasons. But yeah, we can do costs, but they're sitting around $4,500 per square kilometer, Richard. Used to be 1,100. 10 years ago, it was $1,100. It's now sitting in 4.5, gone up considerably. So, bear, you know.
50 years ago, the highest in the world was 2,800 in West Bengal, and so it's double that. And then the highest in Africa was around about 1,000.
Thank you very much. The second question? Take my brother there.
Credits to Dennis Kelly, by the way, took that photograph in Kuzi Game Reserve. See the notches for identifying in the ears. Is there something?
Just to add on what Tony has said concerning the reinforcement of the staff, can the government also be directly involved in the form of soldiers and policemen also be in the field just to help the rangers in as far as monitoring and prevention is concerned? Why I'm saying this is because there's so much South African Defence Force that are idling from my information that I have, and then they are not utilized optimally. This is not a problem for a particular game reserve. It's a national problem. We are losing our animals here, our national inheritance. So what I'm saying is, can't we somehow, because if I'm a thief, I want to poach, and there's only a game ranger that I'm going to face, I feel I can still go on. But if there is a game ranger to face, a soldier and a police, I will take time to think before I can go there. So let's think about getting policemen involved.
Okay, thanks for the comment. It'd be interesting when Ken gives his talk to ask. The military are involved in Kruger, but elsewhere in Africa, military haven't had a good reputation coming into game reserves, and they're quite a difficult thing to manage. Certainly, it's not something you do lightly. Your back's got to be really against the wall when you bring in the military. So let's try not get there in KZN. Thank you.